Did you know just how dangerous asbestos is? Asbestos was used extensively in Germany in the 1970s and 80s. Many buildings today, like this school behind me, aren't used anymore because, amongst other problems, they're full of asbestos. The material is highly toxic. Today, it is responsible for 50% of all occupational cancers. The German Wolfgang Leiner Weigand got exactly such a type of cancer. In the 1970s and 80s, he worked as a bricklayer, cutting asbestos sheets. He fell ill with asbestosis, a disease derived from asbestos exposure, which decades later turned into lung cancer.
When you hear that the diagnosis is lung cancer, you are simply shocked and don't even ask why. We got the first clue in the hospital. The doctors asked if I'd come into contact with products containing asbestos. That's when it went bling. Yes.
Yeah.
Around 70 countries worldwide have banned or restricted the use of asbestos, including Germany. But in other parts of the world, countries continue to use it. For example, in India, with fatal consequences.
If it cannot be used safely in these 70 countries, it cannot be used safely here in India.
But what exactly is asbestos? And how dangerous is it? Where are people most exposed, and how could its use be stopped in the future? Let's have a look together. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral that is extracted from mines. Its fibrous nature and resistance to heat, electricity and corrosion made it valuable for many products, such as ceiling insulation, flooring and roofing. The use of asbestos skyrocketed after the Second World War, especially in Europe, but also in Asia and the Middle East. As asbestos use increased, so did the number of diseases until today. Studies show that asbestos-related diseases cause an estimated 255,000 deaths per year around the globe.
It causes a chronic debilitating disease. It causes mesothelioma, asbestosis, lung cancer.
The dangerous thing about asbestos is that it doesn't make you fall ill directly. The fibers lay in your lungs for decades, and diseases can break out decades later. Just like Wolfgang's case. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in his 40s, many years after he had worked with asbestos.
You don't notice it at first. You're just coughing. You have a little sputum. At the time, I was still smoking. But even then, you think you are coughing because you smoke. You don't have negative thoughts. You don't notice cancer either. It usually only becomes noticeable when it's too late.
Many others suffer similarly, and it often ends badly. In Germany, roughly 1,300 people die each year of asbestos-related diseases. And there may be more, as many asbestosis patients don't get recognized as such. Getting accurate figures on how many people have become ill or died on a global level is even more difficult, as many countries don't collect the data. However, an estimated 50,000 people in India are at risk of dying every year. This is why so many countries have started banning or restricting the use of asbestos since the late 70s. But there are major exceptions. The EU banned asbestos in the 1990s, and we can see that since then, its use decreased massively. However, in Asia and the Middle East, it continued. Around the world, asbestos is still used in over 30 countries, where few controls and poor legislation are in place, according to the WHO.
These materials are put forward as being a quick, cheap alternative that can be used readily, but often it's forgotten about what the long-term consequences are.
Some countries are still heavily involved in either producing or using asbestos, despite all the risks the material bears. China, Brazil and Kazakhstan were among the biggest producers of asbestos, together mining around 550,000 metric tons. However, the country that exceeded them all in 2022 was Russia. It exported more than $180 million worth of asbestos, quite a lucrative business for the country. Without it, the worldwide asbestos trade would not flourish the way it does today. Russia even has a town called Asbestos, where the fibre is extracted. The city is also called a dying town because of its strikingly high number of cancer cases. Some of the mining countries use the asbestos themselves, others export it around the world. Among the largest consumers of asbestos are Russia, Indonesia and China, with a total of more than 400,000 metric tons in 2021. But India exceeds every other country in the use of asbestos.
You can't imagine even one place which does not have asbestos. Either in the building or in the water supply pipe or in the vehicles, in their brake shoes and brake lining or in their talcum powder. So there is no place which is free of asbestos.
India closed its own mines in the last decades bit by bit, but then started importing the material in huge quantities. The country uses it mainly in the construction sector with hardly any health regulations.
If human biology is the same everywhere, if it is poisonous in Europe, it is poisonous here. If it cannot be used safely in these 70 countries, it cannot be used safely here in India.
It's a ticking time bomb. Over the next few decades, researchers expect more than 6 million Indians to contract an asbestos-related disease, including more than 600,000 cancer cases. The worst part is, many Indians don't realize that they could be next.
It is the moral duty of all the people who understand its hazards to act promptly.
The WHO is pushing for an end to asbestos immediately.
It's much better to stop the use and to then cope with sort of the legacy uses from 50, 60 years ago. Whatever countries continuing to use, it's just building up more and more of the problem.
The United Nations has made several attempts to ban asbestos, but this has been blocked by a number of countries, including Russia and India. But one country that was heavily involved in trading it now made a turnaround. Brazil put a ban on asbestos mining in 2022 after the Supreme Court had already ended its use. Could this be a turning point in the history of asbestos? Regional experts are not so sure.
This total ban is far from being a reality. Recently, the Brazilian Association of People Exposed to Asbestos said that despite the ban, asbestos continues to be commercialized and used in Brazil.
This could have consequences for decades to come, as we can see in Europe. Meanwhile, in Germany, 30 years after its ban, asbestos-related diseases continue to rise. Wolfgang got lucky. He survived his cancer. Today, he's almost 70, but he will never forget the day of his diagnosis.
On that day, my daughter came by to visit me, and I told her the sad news. I said, "Melanie, I have a 50% chance of making it," which was a lie, but I clung to it. It was really only 10%, but I clung to it.
Wolfgang survived. Many other asbestosis patients don't.